The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Good morning and good evening, everyone. This is the Agile Coaching Network. The Agile Coaching Network, if you don't know who we are, we're brought to you by the Agile Alliance. Agile Alliance is a nonprofit organization that formed up after the manifesto was written back in 2001. And since we've been running things like conferences and events, but we've also been funding initiatives that are helping people to practice Agile adoptions better and practice Agile in general across your organization. Notion of expert comes up every once in a while. I see that in the feedback. Let the experts talk. This actual call is actually not about just experts talking. It's about all of us having a conversation about how Agile and Agile interacts within our organizations. And if you're new to Agile, you can share your perspective. That's just as valid as the perspective that those of us who've been practicing Agile for the last decade. So feel free to join the conversation. So with that, as we start off today, one of the things that I was thinking about, and we can kind of dive into this topic as we go, is that I was thinking about some of the principles of Agile behind the Agile Manifesto itself. And if you look at some of the principles, one that always strikes me, and I always hear people having issues with either bad work environments or not having enough trust within the organization and others, but yet we have this principle that says that building projects around motivated individuals and giving them the environment that they need in order to have this trust to get their job done correctly. And so I want to just kick off today's conversation with, I just wanted to find out from people, how do you motivate? How do you create, good work environments or great work environments? And how do you provide support? And how do you build that trust within the organization itself? So to kick off this morning, if Hendrik or Jorg or Linda, do you guys want to chime in on this one?
The thing that first comes to my mind when I hear how to motivate is then pick and drive. So he has done some really good research about what motivates people. And one thing, and I find this in my practice in a large enterprise confirmed all the time, that it's not money that motivates people. It's really this purpose, mastery, autonomy that then Pink is talking about. So people need to understand what's the purpose of their work, how they are contributing to an overall goal. And for me, for example, a very important part of this is to create a clear line of sight from a development team, for example, to a customer, to really see who are we serving and so on. And then mastery and autonomy. Mastery meaning the team has all the capabilities to cope with the challenge at hand. And the autonomy to take their decisions and drive it. And the environment, of course, that gives them the support needed once they are running out of wisdom and they need help. So that's, from my point of view, a very important aspect of this.
Yeah, really key points, Henrik. To take it to the individual level, I think actually it's about attention. So if people don't have somebody who takes them serious and adapts the way the interaction is between leadership and people depending on the situation, that means current skill of a person, current involvement. So if somebody's new to a topic, obviously a bit more discussion, help, and openness is maybe needed than somebody who's really expert. Just let them go. So that this adaptability towards knowledge, experience in the company, whatever, to people, and then definitely directional leadership, say where to go and what might be beyond a jungle, and actually walk the talk. People are seeing what you do and they will emulate it. So if you want people to be trusting, start being trusting. If you want people to be open, start being open yourself.
Before you can build trust in the workplace, I think one of the things that's important is to sit down with a group of people that you work with, maybe it's your team, maybe just some of your associates, and talk about what is causing fear in the workplace. Try to identify how is fear showing up in people's behaviors and actions, the work that they do, or perhaps the work that they won't do, the lack of innovation. All of those things stem from fear, and it's very difficult to build trust when there is a lot of fear existing. So I think it's important to look at that and consider the impacts it's having as you're looking to build trust.
I agree with what Linda said just now. I mean, yes, I mean, if you come with a mindset of a fear, obviously people are not going to open up and they're going to remain in their silos. They're going to remain in their shell. One of the things also is, I mean, how psychologically safe is my team, or how do they feel it rather? So yes, we do have teams engaging, or we do have coaches doing surveys, but at the end of the day, are these surveys results being really implemented? And is my team more psychologically safe than what it was when I took up the engagement? I think that also motivates a team to a lot of extent.
I find that most people that are going off and doing Agile adoptions, they don't address that enough. There's an organization that I used to work for. One of their new mantras is transparency. We want to have lots of transparency all over the place in the organization. And if you don't have trust in the organization, transparency becomes a very dangerous thing that's kind of thrown out in there, because people don't want to have that level of vulnerability if they don't have trust. How about others?
Oh, hey, Ray. This is Seisha. I actually am going to extend what you basically just said. I think there are a couple of aspects when it comes to trust or creating an environment and all that. Unfortunately, what I've seen is even when people call themselves coaches, they're actually more of agile coaches than actually being professional coaches also, some aspect of it. So they're more in terms of actually providing how do you use, like, for example, SAFe, or how do you use Scrum, or what are the ceremonies and this. That's the more concentration that the team members are having and the coach is also embedding, instead of actually understanding what the pain points are and how can we create a real team environment and help the team members to first of all coexist and then support each other. I think those aspects are only coming in the last, if anyone is lucky at all. And that's the reason why I think even the psychological safety someone was mentioning doesn't exist either. I think that's the first thing we need to concentrate on. How do we actually make the teams work together better? And then we can actually add the framework to it.
Let me ask a question on that. And how do you facilitate that? How do you do that within your own work?
So the way I usually start is I don't go ahead and give them the framework. What I do is I actually have conversations with the team. I do a lot of team building exercises. I have like a bunch of them that I do first. And then I basically try to understand what their work is. When I say I just wear the facilitation hat so that the team can actually come up with what their pain points are, what their handoffs are, the lead times and things like that, so that they can have a better understanding as to what the work they're doing right now and how they can, and also provide enough space so that they can actually come up with, oh, okay, these are all our problems. How can we solve it? So in that way, no one is volunteering them, but they are actually coming up with the suggestions because they are the right people to do that. And so I'm actually embedding all this to them. And later on, when they start actually doing the work, I give them, okay, you have all this list of frameworks. They all provide certain lean agile principles and values. Let's pick and choose couple and then use them. And then we'll explore what other things later on. So that's how I would do. The frameworks come last to me. It's more about team building first.
I like the voluntelling. I think that's. I think we've all been kind of guilty of that sometimes. Randall, what do you think?
Yes, one thing that I do strongly believe in the work that Dan Pink did, and I wish more companies would really understand that. But I think from on a team level, what I really like to do is I try and I think what's very important at a team level is empathy for your teammates. I think that getting to know them as human beings and not just as a type of developer or tester or whatever. I think when you understand people as human beings, you create a much better environment, and you do tend to trust people more when you really understand where somebody's coming from. It doesn't mean you have to all be best friends, but at least if you can understand what individual their situations are in life, and sometimes doing some kind of group or team building exercises outside of the four walls of the office really help you with that. But I think that is something that I find at least is extremely important.
Cool. Those are good suggestions. Cheryl, how about you?
We find that, and we're over here in the Caribbean, we find that it is very important for the teams to identify the problems themselves. So how we pick this up is that you do a peer review, you get the feedback, and you get more honest feedback from the peer review. But when you sit with the team or when you speak to them individually, we're very open and we're very honest. But because they do these quarterly peer reviews, no one is seeing them doing the peer review. It comes to us as the coaches. We tend to see the more real feelings coming out. So that's how we get to confirm that there's no real trust. So we have to take particularly the Scrum Master, the product owner, who are the more influential ones on the team, to really kind of pull out from them what are the real issues. And then we go into some retrospectives, and these are not retros coming out of a particular sprint, but just a retrospective around the team itself. So going back to someone who spoke about how important the team building is, I really think that is the nucleus to getting transparency and trust coming out of teams.
That's cool. And you know what? Agile in the Caribbean sounds very nice.
No, it's not.
It's not?
We're having the same challenges as everybody else in the world. When we go to the conferences and we try to get feedback, the problems are common.
I'm just saying that the Caribbean sounds nice.
It does.
That's good. Pamela, are you there?
I am. I have a question because we've been doing Agile for over a year now, and it's worked pretty well. We've had some bumps in the road. But how are other people dealing with it? It seems there are two groups that seem to really resist the change to Agile because of the rework. Mostly in our environment, it's the data developers who have problems that they still want to use that waterfall methodology because of the rework that has to be done, in our environment. And how do we get them to embrace it's okay to do rework? It's almost expected, but we need to keep moving because everybody else being Agile and then being waterfall is not working.
Interesting. Microsoft implemented interesting strategy about code and question of writing new code versus maintaining code. And I don't know if they still do this, but they actually put in a guideline or a rule that says that you own your code for life. So if there's something that went wrong with your code, you need to go back in and you're the one who's probably most qualified to repair it. And I think Google did something similar and others. The question of rework is always going to be there, and refactoring and getting used to doing refactoring, at least in my view, was hard for my teams originally, but letting them know that you just can't go off and work on the cool new stuff and continue to write junky code and not refactor that code later was not how we were going to do business moving forward. And so kind of leveling that expectation out became part of that. John, do you have something to add to this?
Along those same lines, I think Mike Schwartz from Amazon Web Services has that same view that there's a kind of way of thinking. We make this distinction between new projects and maintenance, and kind of to talk what you just mentioned, Ray. He was that there's no such thing as maintenance when it comes to software, because you pretty much, if you release software, if you don't do anything to it, it runs exactly the same efficiencies as the day that you released it. So we make updates to it, and those updates can have a negative impact on it. And so having separate teams that do new projects, or ones that do maintenance, you kind of get that disconnect. You have the expertise of the people who built it. And so if you have a new team that's suddenly just doing maintenance, then they're not going to be as efficient with it. They're not going to know the ins and outs of it. So it's kind of counterproductive when you have that kind of mindset. And kind of like what Ray said, it's not something that's new. It's kind of something that we're adapting to, trying to get through that whole process.
Exactly. IJ, are you there?
All right. So shout out to the Agile in the Caribbean there. And the gentleman that spoke about building empathy, I think that's a key thing to building trust in a team. So I would say that, definitely want to understand from the team member what really is important to them as an individual, right? And then build that into what it takes to make the team successful, because really it's not an individual that's going to shine at the end of the day. It is the whole team, right? Trying to build that success, and then try to understand, from a personal, for each one of them, what incentivizes them, what really is important, what is distracting them from being their best. And then also trying to understand what do they need to be more successful, right? So even though directives are coming, from management, at the same time the team owns their work, and they have to me, you want to build an environment that the team comes and enjoy being there. And this really, really works well, of course, for the co-locating team, right? So you deal with those folks on a daily basis, so you understand their personal lives as far as, what's the triggers that are there, what makes them unhappy, sad, and then also around their work, what are how they're contributing. So I just feel like we need to understand more about the individuals and be able to empathize with them. And I think that's the key to actually building trust, that you really care about the team.
Very important aspect to that as well. And that is, yes, I agree to everything that has been said here, but we should not force people to like each other. It's totally okay to not like certain person, and still live with them. Yeah, so
Sure.
That's really what this is about, I think, because sometimes people are a bit afraid that, now I need to like all my teammates or whatever, and this is really not the goal. Actually, we want that people have sometimes that tough discussion coming from the different perspectives and so on, and they anyhow can agree on things. This is really what we need to teach them, I think.
You know what, Hendrik? I like you. I just want to let you know that. It's important.
I like you as well, Ray.
Christine, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to add, as I say, we might not get along, but as long as you have respect for your team members and you listen to them, I think that you win. However, I think the approach, a lot of people have embraced Agile and like it, but there are some teams that haven't. And I think that's our biggest struggle, because, we're doing sprinting. We want to get the work done. It's about taking smaller chunks and being nimble and being able to deliver that within your sprint. And I just think people want to just go back to the old ways. I'll do my work. I'll see you in 10 weeks, and then you guys can finish however you want. So that's the challenge that we're facing, is that most of the team are respectful of Agile and other people, but some are still a little hesitant about it. So it's really, how do we get everybody on board?
Yeah, well, one of the things to add in that space is when I've dug into most teams who say that they don't want to practice Agile, they want to use the old method. Yeah. If you say, please outline the old method for me, what you'll discover is that there's probably not a method there. It's sort of, I just go to my office and I do stuff, but there isn't a formal methodology of how teams link together and other things that have been put forth. It's actually more of a chaotic development system, is what I've seen. And let's see, Christine, I activated your microphone. What did you have on this?
Thanks. I was trying to respond. I raised my hand to respond to the question or comment about the DBAs resisting because they felt there would be rework. And I've experienced that too. So what we've been struggling with is splitting stories. I've looked all over the internet, for examples of splitting stories, and it seems so easy, right? But when you start splitting your stories in nice vertical slices, it starts to get very difficult down at the database layer. And so my team, I did convince them to do this, and the DBAs built a logical model. So on basically a piece of paper or whiteboard, they drew in the new tables and the columns and all this kind of stuff. And as the stories were written, they would create a physical database, so a column or a table or what have you, and then load and master the data. And that did not last long. That did not last long before they started saying, hey, it would be so much faster if we already know the data that needs to go in. Why can't we just put it in all at once? And there was a lot of pushback, mostly not only because it seemed like they weren't afraid of rework. They just felt like, hey, it would be so much easier to do it all at once. We already know the data for this release. And people are working on more than one project at once. So it's even more confusing to, like, the task switching is huge, right? So they lose their focus too. So now they're back to trying to, for a release, to build the physical model just for that one release. So I'd like to hear more about this and what other people are experiencing.
I'm experiencing the same exact thing, and I really appreciate you bringing up that point.
Donald, you've been on hold for a little bit too. What do you have on this?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Not necessarily speaking to the DBA piece, but a couple of things. One, for how do we motivate it? We really focus on quality for the team and the team accountability. When people say, "Well, I did my piece," when we build the "we all win" or "we all fail" type thing, has been very helpful for us. One question I have, interested for feedback. I heard someone say, it's easy to build the environment and get to know each other when they're all co-located. However, in many situations, including ours, typically the team is distributed. Some days they're in the office, but not all of them. So most days the team's distributed. What's been the experience of the team on, motivating and creating a good environment, providing support, building trust when you don't have everybody in the room, and you've gotten through the basics of, a little get to know you, 2 truths, 1 lie, whatever the case. How do we, when we get down to it and we're delivering work, how do we keep that cohesiveness and keep that focus on quality and team accountability?
Couple of the techniques that we've used is, tools like Slido and other things where there's real-time communication going on, even though that they might not be face-to-face. Having the ability to be able to communicate back and forth rapidly versus through an email system worked well for us. The other thing that we had to add into there, though, was sort of the serendipity component that you get in a co-location that you don't normally get if you're working virtually. And the serendipity channel is literally a channel called Serendipity, where you can say, hey, I'm taking my kid to the ballet, or I'm doing these things over the weekend, someplace where they can get a more contrast to the person's a full individual. And I know other corporate systems have actually built out sort of internal Facebooks and other things just to keep people better connected together. A lot of great discussions on this, but I think it's probably about time that we pivot over to the main questions. The top question, and this one's a fun one. Should people in an organization be given the choice to be agile or not?
Maybe let me start with a simple fact. People always have a choice. First thing, they will leave the company. So, and that's, I think teams should have a choice somehow, because they should be most effective. And maybe there's something smarter out there than Agile. So listen to them.
In some ways, I can't stop laughing about this question, but I do agree with Ulrich. In truth, everyone does have a choice. And as coaches, we see people making and not making the choice every day. I think the better question should be is how to create an environment such that people want to choose a better way to work, right? And what are the circumstances we need to put in play so that that people can, of their free choice, sign up for changes and be a part of deciding which changes they make. I think a lot of this question comes from the fact that some coaches come in and they're instructed by their employer to coach a certain way. So everybody has to learn Scrum, or everybody has to do Kanban, or name your favorite approach, rather than going in with an open heart and an open mind and finding out what would the teams want to do to help them be better. That alone is being agile enough for me.
I certainly agree with Linda, because you can't force change on people, but you have to create the environment and the atmosphere for them to see the real reason why this change is critical to your success and the organization's success. And when both are aligned, and that's where we as coaches have to come and help them to see that path to why Agile is the better way of working, or whatever is the better way of working. But if we say Agile, we have to help them to buy into it. And that's one of our roles as coaches.
I absolutely agree with both statements. One thing that I try to do is I always level set and say, my job as a coach isn't to say you're doing Scrum wrong or you're doing Kanban wrong. The whole point at the end of the day is not to be agile, is to use it as goals. And if you're doing a waterfall traditional project management way and you're reaching your goals, that's perfectly fine. But if there's something we can change, one little change we can make to make it a little bit better, would that be valuable? And I think at the end of the day, it's really what is the value you're providing for your organization?
Fully agree. Santosh, are you there? Do you have something to add on this?
Yes, this is Santosh. So one thing I would like to add to this is it's really what we call a safe environment. That actually attracts people to the whatever methodology we are trying to implement. So from my point of view, if you create a pull, and I've seen it in multiple engagements that we have done, when this particular way of doing things starts succeeding, people start gravitating towards that. And it's always the case that people are very reluctant to change. They're in their comfort zone. But then when they see that, this agile team or agile methods is actually delivering the value and people are actually more happy than what they were doing before, that's what will attract people. So yeah, they have choice, but the choice is almost like a guidance for them saying, if you want to succeed, this is the pull, then this is what will get you there where you want to go. So I think creating that pull is our leadership or coaches or whatever the roles are in the leadership side, that will drive the attraction.
I agree with that.
How about others?
This is Seisha. One thing I would add to what everyone said, I completely agree with that. And one thing I'd add is, even when we are actually going through a transformation, it will be the two aspects that I would like to concentrate on. One is how much is the leadership involved in it, in the transformation? Do they really want to do it, or are they just going to be a volunteer again? That is kind of critical. And the number two is, like everyone was saying, I'm a big fan of transforming with invitation. So we invite people and the teams, and if they feel like, yes, I think we can do this and we want to do it, only then we actually invite them, we train, we coach them and all that. So those are the two key aspects that I always look at.
Those are good points. And we always found that when we forced adoptions on people, that was the most difficult. Emily, are you there?
I am. I think of this question a little bit from the organizational level. And right away, what came to mind for me was, we talk about funding persistent, consistent teams versus, if I think back to Waterfall, we funded projects. So I think that if we give people in an organization a chance to be agile or not, your governance costing system needs to have some flexibility built into it so that it can pivot either way to handle, a group of people that's working in a non-agile way or a group of people that's working in an agile way. It's just kind of an afterthought.
Expand on how you would do that within an organization.
I don't know. Our organization has transitioned to an agile costing, lean agile costing. So we are looking at value delivered by our agile teams. So I don't know how you would do that if there was, a mix of, I'm going to say, projects versus teams. I don't know what that would look like, but I'm just putting that out there as something that might need to be a point of, flexibility if your organization is going to position itself that way.
Yeah, I mean, what we found is that when we used the word agile, it evolved from not using a method. It involved using the mindset. And the methods could change depending on the workload that was being produced. And so what we found is that when you get later on in the life cycle, specifically things that are moving towards obsolescence and there's high domain knowledge in the space, was Scrum the best methodology to use? Or on the opposite end of that scale, if we were using, sort of in the early opportunity phase, was, again, Scrum was not the right process. And so each one of those required different finance model. It required a different way of actually approaching it. So I agree with that. Susanna.
Yes, I'm here.
What do you have to offer?
So it all depends on exactly what your team is seeking to improve or what the organization wants to improve. And are you experiencing any pain point? Because I have also seen a lot of people forcing or trying to go agile when their process or the current methodology is working, the users are happy, they just want to do agile for the sake of doing agile. One thing for all the teams to realize whether they are part of it is, tell me what's the pain point. The users, do they have anything? Is your management happy? Is the team collaborating okay? Responding to those questions can help the team have a voice and say whether they want to choose agile or not.
Right. And I think awareness, I don't have the graph available, but I can post it definitely online. But we actually, part of our rollout strategy became not just starting with training or starting with directly saying that we're going this direction. What we first did, and this was something about Intel culture at least, is that we always had this nerve ending that was there called always the paranoid survive. It came from the foundations of our company. And having leadership come in and be able to set that level of urgency in the very beginning and talking about enlisting people to the cause and what we were trying to do, what were the business reasons of why we were going towards adopting a particular methodology or method or anything, even developing a product, found that enlistment, saying that, hey, these are the problem statements, and being such an engineering culture that we were in, of course everyone's going to chime in and say, yeah, I want to help. There was, of course, there were the holdouts. There are holdouts in all organizations, but I think spending that first component of being able to frame it correctly, so it doesn't become just an agile for agile's sake, it's agile because we need to go support this market, becomes a better scenario. So with that, do we want to pivot to the next? Yes. Yes, I heard a yes. There was a quiet yes there. I like quiet yeses. Let's go to the next question, which is, how do you stop or avoid teams from converting user story points into time?
So Ray, this is Linda. I'll start this one off. I think one of the challenges with converting story points to time is that both of them are numeric values. So for me, one of the ways to avoid that transition, people are trying to do the math in their head, don't use the numbers. Instead of starting out with story points, start out with t-shirt sizing and get people accustomed to not talking about time and sort of get that out of their mind. Get them some experience trying to right size stories and to be able to write stories that fit into whatever their iteration window is. And then later, if you find that you still need to do something different, then go ahead and try the transition to story points. I think there are two factors right now in play in our arena that are causing some trouble. One is the safe advice that says, 8 points per person. So people start creating that as, 1 point a day. I wish they hadn't done that. I've seen a lot of bad behavior coming from it. So just avoid the numbers altogether. Try using T-shirt sizes and take it from there.
Linda, I agree. I like the T-shirt sizes as well. But to share another method that helps for me and has helped my teams is poker planning. Because if you do the discussion about why is that number there, you can clearly steer that people don't talk about it takes long, but it's complicated. I see that challenge. That's what I'm going to do. So you get much further away from time to content and scope and delivery. So I recommend poker planning as a really fun exercise with a lot of value.
Pinar, what do you have?
Yes, hi, this is Pinar. I think the tendency is a lot to do with the way that we plan our work. So we work in 2 weeks or 3 weeks sprints. And when you think about the time you have ahead, then you try to plan your work in terms of how much time you want to spend on each activity. When you start implementing Kanban board, instead of like a sprint planning, do maybe more pull type of planning. I think that will help the team to get their minds away from the time and focus on more the comparability of the work and the complexity of the work ahead. That's it. Thank you.
That's a good point. Thank you. Kara.
Hi. My approach is the no estimates approach, that you can't throughput and avoid even getting into the conversation about hours versus numbers versus story points. Statistically, the throughput is more accurate and more of a predictor than story points. And I think story points have they've been pushed out of shape to because they can't ever really reflect a 5 is not the same as another 5 and an 8 is not the same as another 8. They can't really capture the things. What we have to do is talk about the details of what makes a story ready to go and what makes a story ready. Do we have good acceptance criteria? Do we understand the architecture changes? Having those levels of conversations, which is typically what we tell ourselves we're going to use velocity to do, is the thing that is of most value. And once you've got a sprint or two behind you, you've got actual data of how many stories you complete. And one of the things I really like about throughput as compared to velocity is when you try to gamify throughput, instead of to add more stories to your sprint, you have to make them smaller. And smaller means more independent, more testable, all of the invest things to it. So you kind of automatically build in more quality if you're going to gamify and up the throughput. So the focus, to take the focus completely off which of these is going to be the more accurate predictor, hours or story points, looking forward. I think it was Linda was saying, when you're looking into the future, you can't work it out. You can only guess. But if you're doing the same level of guessing with, we think we can do these stories, this is what we know we need to do for all of them. And then we get to the end of the sprint and we see whether we were right and we count what we were right about. And I found that that's a much bigger trust builder, although it feels more scary to step off the ledge and not do this number guessing beforehand. After a couple of sprints, when you've got the data going backwards, it tends to build trust much more.
Absolutely agree with that. Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. One of the things that really bugged me is I was on a team once where our Scrum Master convinced the team that we should use ideal days to estimate. And of course, the currency changes throughout a project as your efficiency goes up. And what I could get done in a day today is not what it was, when we first started the project, because we know more, we've got more infrastructure in place. So it takes away any concept of managing velocity. What I like to teach people is, I'm a big rummage sale kind of guy, and my wife will hand me a box of shoes and says, okay, go price these. And I can't tell the difference between these cute little pumps that my daughter wore when she was 3 versus, a shoddy old pair of tennis shoes that shouldn't probably be even in the rummage sale. So I'll just take them and line them up, the shoddy ones on the left, the cute pumps on the right. And then I use that to kind of illustrate the concept of relative complexity or relative value. And I don't know that it's really all that effective, but it definitely kind of conveys the principle of this kind of, it's a currency, but yet it doesn't necessarily need to be one.
I kind of like it. It sort of like fits into shirt sizes a little bit, but I can see a picture of that in my brain. So it's pretty good. Smita?
Hey, thank you for having me.
Hi.
I love using t-shirt sizes, but often, ran into problems to calculate load or a number of stories that are picked up based on capacity. So I actually thought this is sort of management problem to make sure that they are convinced that no teams are wasting their efforts. You know what I mean? So my questions are, I have 2 questions. How do we make sure that we could pick up the right amount of work to complete them, at a sustainable pace? And the second question is, how do you actually measure the throughputs when there are multiple factors changing at a given time, such as dependencies and types of work? So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I can inject with, there's certain things that we look at. And I think the notion, if I look at a particular task and I really don't have a clue, and a lot of times we will force a number onto it rather than doing a spike or doing experimentation around it to learning more about it. And so I think one concept of just planning, of people sitting down and saying that this is on the Fibonacci scale, way outside of scope, I still think that's relevant when we plan. The numbers in between, something we have high certainty on and the stuff that we have impossible certainty on, I think that's where we get into this gray area. And I think, as others have talked about, really we're going to know after we've done it. And then we use that comparative model that when we're looking at the next several stories or several different requirements that we're trying to do, that comparison of, okay, that seems similar to this. There's still an aspect of a guess to it, but it's probably a pretty sound, well-informed guess. I'm not sure what others think about that.
Thank you for answering. I do have another question at the moment. So we use Fibonacci series, but then in the end, it finally gets changed into ideal days or man days. How do I convince that we should not do that?
I think we feel comfortable with knowing that it's going to be X days. And for whatever reason, the notion of, if we're using a time box of 2 weeks and we can accomplish X amount of work in 2 weeks, and we have a run rate of accomplishing, that amount, I don't understand where people really want to get into the man hours, man days, that type of methodology. I would, as a Scrum Master, I just would never do it. I would never publish to it. And as a program manager, training program managers about how that estimating is biased and could lead to bad results. Look at your trend lines, look at your burn downs. You're going to get enough information without having to go to that level of detail.
One technique that I have used, and that seemed to have stuck with most of my teams and even with the management, is that I ask them, consider story as a going from point A to point B, defined as what is the distance that you have to go. If you're going to start measuring in time, then there are so many different factors that come into picture, like what type of car you have, the traffic patterns that you have, what kind of a driver you are, those kind of things. So making it a number of hours, number of days, instead of that, think about what is the distance you have to cover. And I think the second part I always ask them to do is change the thinking of velocity as a capacity measure, not a performance measure. So it's to consider that. I think one of the contributors said that, once you have some number of, sprints going through, how many points you delivered. Make that as a measure and say, how much capacity do we have? So look at it from that side and look at each story as a distance you want to cover, how much capacity we have to cover the distance every time. And then it automatically starts changing the philosophy of our thinking from hours to really the points as to capacity wise. So if you look at the capacity, it changes the mindset.
Kind of to add to that, one of the things I saw that Menlo Innovation did was unique and kind of cool, is they actually had an A3 sheet of paper that they would use to represent a sprint.
Yes.
And then they would have different size Post-its that could, you would write your user story on them, and you would have to place these different size stories on this A3 sheet of paper. And if it didn't fit on the A3 sheet of paper, it had to be moved to the next A3 sheet of paper, which was the next sprint. And what was kind of unique about it is that if you had, like, say, 2 large stories, only 2 large stories would fit on the A3. Or if you had multiple smaller stories, you could put, 1 large story and several, these smaller stories together. And that visualization, and they actually had the customers actually load that sprint. I thought that was a beautiful way of people starting to get a representation of visually about how things fit in the team. And then in retrospect, they would look at what would not be accomplished. So they would have the visualization of the A3 sheet of paper and the things that didn't get done and why, which was, I thought, just beautiful.
Maybe to add to that picture of traveling, I've seen teams who used actually Google Maps to plot their progress. So for the project, they picked a city they'd like to go and plotted the progress as going from the development side to that city. And that was pretty easy for management to understand where they were, and quite a fun thing as well.
So I always take story points and I try to always explain it with a shoe analogy. So if I'm buying a shoe, and let's say I have a number shoe, a 8 number shoe or a 10 number shoe, obviously that shoe is not unique to me. It will have a range of values. So it will have a smaller size, it will have a larger size. So I always try to correlate it with that, saying that when we say it's a 3-story point or a 5-story point, obviously we don't directly convert it into an effort. We rather, our team's endeavor should be to come out with a range of estimate which will fit into that. And again, when we consider that, we do not only have to consider effort, but we also need to consider the other 2 dimensions to it, the complexity and basically the uncertainty or the risk which that story carries. So that is how I treat as story points, using a shoe analogy essentially. We did hear about the distance analogy, but the one which I apply to my teams is the shoe analogy.
Cool. I like that. So we are at the top of the hour, everyone. Can I just see a show of hands? How many of you are going to be at Agile 2019 next month? Ooh, look at this. Well, cool. That's a fair number of the people that we have here. So that's what's coming up next. So we'll be most of us here. I know, Hendrik, you're going to be over at Agile 2019. I'll be over there. We're going to have the Business Agility Lab that we'll be running over in the Agile Alliance Lounge. We're going to be having a special session that's going to be happening every afternoon. We're going to have a lean coffee session, ACN style, with any group that wants to show up. We do have limited seating, so we have roughly around 20 seats that'll be available for that session. We'll also have a whole bunch of other activities talking about how we can effectively, as coaches, adopt Agile at the enterprise level and then throughout the entire company. So we'll be there most of the week. So if you want to have a conversation with myself, we'll also have mentoring sessions that'll be being done in the afternoons. You can come in and sign up, and you can say, hey, Ray, I would like to go spend some time with you and just talk about whatever it is one-on-one, or you can join in some of the group sessions as well. We would love to have you there. If you're not going to be there, we're going to do our best to document this for you so that you guys are able, we can amplify the knowledge that we gain throughout the week, like what we do with the podcast here. A little news on the podcast. Thank you guys all for sending that out to your friends and relatives. I don't think you send it to your friends and relatives. Maybe your friends, but probably not your relatives. We've gotten great replays. We're approaching now the 40,000 mark, which is beautiful. That means that we're getting good amplification from the podcast. And I really thank you guys for doing that. So with that, let's go ahead and bring this particular session to a close. And thank you very much. This podcast is provided by the Agile Alliance for educational and informative purposes only. To find out more information about the member-supported Agile Alliance, please go to agilealliance.org to find out about more upcoming events as well as different programs that are available to help you with your Agile journey.